This wasn't random. You already know. You just haven't looked at it directly. By the end of this, it won't feel vague anymore. It won't feel like background noise. It will have a shape. Not dramatic, not loud, just precise. Avoidance rarely looks like running away. Most of the time, it looks reasonable. It looks productive. It looks busy. You answer messages. You organize things. You start new plans. You think about improving yourself. You consume information. You analyze. You reflect. On the surface, nothing appears wrong. In fact, it appears responsible. But there is a difference between movement and direction. There is a difference between thinking and confronting. There is a difference between preparing and entering. Avoidance is not laziness. It is redirection of attention. Attention is the most powerful filter you have. Where it goes, experience forms. Where it does not go, truth waits. When something feels threatening to your internal stability, attention quietly shifts away from it. Not dramatically, not consciously, just slightly. A thought appears. It tightens something inside. And almost instantly, the mind offers an alternative focus. A task, a distraction, a smaller problem. The nervous system prefers manageable discomfort over existential discomfort. So instead of confronting the larger truth, you manage the smaller irritations. You clean the surface. You rearrange the visible. You optimize what is controllable. All while the deeper signal remains unaddressed. Avoidance is subtle because it often disguises itself as improvement. You research more before deciding. You wait for clarity. You gather more data. You say it is not the right time. Time becomes the excuse. Circumstance becomes the shield. But underneath these rational layers, there is a specific discomfort you are not entering. Entering is different from thinking about. You can think about something endlessly without ever entering it. Thinking creates distance. Entering collapses distance. Distance feels safe. Entering feels irreversible. That is why avoidance feels logical. It preserves optionality. If you do not fully acknowledge something, you do not have to change anything yet. If you keep it undefined, you are not forced into decision. Undefined discomfort is easier than defined truth. The body knows this. The body senses when something unresolved is circulating. It shows up as restlessness, as subtle agitation, as fatigue without clear cause. But instead of tracing the signal inward, attention moves outward. More stimulation, more input, more noise. Noise reduces awareness of underlying tension. Silence amplifies it. This is why true stillness often feels uncomfortable at first. Not because something is wrong, but because something unexamined rises. Avoidance is not about ignorance. It is about delay. You know the outline. You sense the edge of the truth. But you keep your gaze slightly to the side. The mind is skilled at narrative management. It reframes avoidance as patience. It reframes fear as rational caution. It reframes hesitation as wisdom. And sometimes those reframes are valid, but not always. There is a particular sensation that accompanies avoidance. It is not panic. It is not dramatic anxiety. It is a quiet contraction, a narrowing of internal space. When the avoided subject appears, even briefly, something tightens. Breathing changes. Attention flickers. The topic quickly dissolves into something else. This happens so fast that it often goes unnoticed. Avoidance operates beneath conscious commentary. It is automatic preservation. Preservation of identity. Preservation of stability. Preservation of the current structure. Because confronting certain truths does not only change behavior, it changes self-perception. And identity is guarded carefully. If a truth implies that a relationship is misaligned, or a goal is hollow, or a belief is outdated, the cost of recognition is high. It requires restructuring. Restructuring requires uncertainty. Uncertainty destabilizes control. So instead of destabilizing the whole structure, the mind stabilizes it through selective focus. You look at parts that confirm continuity. You ignore parts that signal rupture. This is not stupidity, it is protection. Protection from psychological disorientation. But the cost of long-term avoidance is fragmentation. The avoided truth does not disappear. It fragments experience. You begin to feel split. Part of you knows. Part of you continues. This split generates low-level tension. It feels like something is slightly off. You might attribute it to stress, to workload, to mood fluctuations. But often, it is unresolved acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is powerful. It reorganizes perception immediately. The moment something is named internally, the energy around it shifts. Avoidance prevents that shift. It keeps the energy suspended. Suspended tension accumulates. Over time, it becomes background heaviness. You adapt to it. You call it normal. You function through it. Functioning is not the same as alignment. Alignment requires integration. Integration requires facing what disrupts the current narrative. The narrative might be that everything is fine, that the situation is temporary, that you can handle it later. Later is the most common refuge of avoidance. Later rarely arrives on its own. Avoidance thrives on ambiguity. If something remains abstract, it can be postponed indefinitely. Clarity threatens postponement. That is why clarity feels heavy at first. Not because it is wrong, but because it demands response. Response implies movement. Movement implies consequence. Consequence implies change. And change is destabilizing, even when it is necessary. Notice how quickly attention shifts when certain thoughts arise. There is a microsecond of recognition, then a redirection. The redirection feels harmless, almost invisible. But repeated hundreds of times, it shapes life trajectory. Avoidance is not one large decision. It is many small deflections. Each deflection preserves the current structure. Eventually, the preserved structure begins to feel misaligned. Not because it collapsed, because it never evolved. Stagnation often hides behind busyness. Busyness is convincing. It creates the illusion of progress. But progress toward what? That question is uncomfortable. It exposes the gap between activity and direction. Direction requires honesty. Honesty requires facing what has been avoided. And facing does not always mean immediate action. It means internal acknowledgement. Acknowledgement collapses the split. The part that knows and the part that continues merge. When they merge, tension reduces. The avoided truth becomes integrated information. Integration changes perception. You begin to see how long you have been circling around the same edge. The edge is familiar. It has been present in different contexts. Different people, different projects, same subtle hesitation. The pattern is not external coincidence. It is internal calibration. Calibration shaped by earlier experiences. Earlier experiences taught you which truths were safe to face and which were dangerous. If facing certain realities previously led to rejection, conflict, or loss, the system learned to delay similar confrontations. That learning remains active. Even when the context has changed. So avoidance today may not match the current risk. It matches the historical memory of risk. The nervous system is conservative. It prioritizes stability over expansion. Expansion requires uncertainty. Uncertainty feels like threat, even when it is growth. Avoidance is the compromise. It maintains current stability while slowly increasing internal friction. Friction manifests as fatigue, as irritability, as diffuse dissatisfaction. You might search externally for explanation, but often the friction is internal resistance to acknowledgement. Resistance consumes energy. Holding a truth at a distance requires constant subtle effort. The effort is quiet, but cumulative. At some point, the cost of holding distance exceeds the cost of seeing clearly. That moment feels like clarity emerging. But clarity was always available. It was simply avoided. Avoidance does not mean weakness. It means protection operating beyond conscious awareness. The question is not whether something is being avoided. It is what internal shift would occur if it were faced. Would a relationship need redefining? Would a role need dissolving? Would an identity need softening? These are structural shifts. Structural shifts alter life patterns. That is why the system hesitates. It anticipates disruption. Disruption is uncomfortable. But long-term misalignment is also uncomfortable. The difference is duration. Avoidance postpones short-term discomfort at the cost of long-term tension. Acknowledgement reverses that ratio. When you sit quietly and allow the avoided thought to surface without pushing it away, something interesting happens. The intensity often decreases. What felt overwhelming in imagination becomes manageable in awareness. Avoidance amplifies fear. Recognition stabilizes it. Because the unknown is always larger than the known. And avoidance preserves the unknown. There is something specific that comes to mind when you hear this. A situation. A conversation not yet had. A realization not fully admitted. Notice the subtle shift in your body when it appears. That shift is not random. It is the signal of avoidance. Not dramatic, just precise. Once you see that, the pattern becomes clearer. Avoidance is not accidental distraction. It is targeted redirection. It protects a narrative. But narratives can outlive their usefulness. When a narrative becomes misaligned with reality, friction increases. The friction you feel is not abstract. It is structural tension between what is known internally and what is maintained externally. The longer this tension persists, the louder it becomes. Eventually, avoidance is no longer possible. The truth surfaces through symptoms, through conflict, through collapse, or through quiet realization. The quiet realization is often the earliest signal. There's something you're avoiding, and it has been waiting patiently. Not to punish, not to disrupt, but to reorganize. When it is finally faced, something realigns. The background noise decreases. The fragmentation softens. And what once felt threatening begins to feel clear. There is more beneath this avoidance. And once that layer is seen, the pattern behind it becomes visible.
I'm Oliver, and now you know why this happens. Or at least a part of it.